Now. Hi, my name is Martyn Sadler, the editor of Rugby League Express, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Mick Hogan, who until very recently was the chairman of Newcastle Thunder, and who is very much involved as the revenue director for the Rugby League World Cup that's being held obviously later this year. And I'm going to talk to Mick about his incredible career in both Rugby League and Rugby Union and other sports. And then go on to talk about the World Cup, Mick. So Mick, welcome today, and it's a real pleasure to see you. And I'd just like to start by saying, you know, it's probably at least 25 years since I first met you, when you were playing as a, you were employed as a development officer in the Northeast, and you were playing for a team called Gateshead Panthers. And I'm sure I saw you playing at the Gateshead International Sports Stadium in what I think was probably a Challenge Cup game. But you've come a long way since then, Mick. But do you have fond memories of those early days?
Thanks, Martyn. Yeah, I really do. It was just a fantastic time. You know, I started playing for Gateshead Panthers when I was actually a student up there, so probably even earlier than that, in 1990. And we'd turn up we used to play in the West Yorkshire Sunday League, and we'd turn up at the City Hall in Newcastle at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And this is the days before mobile phones or social media. And it was literally waiting to see if we had enough to get in the minibus and drive down to a team in Yorkshire that would get beaten up some weeks.
Yeah, I can well believe it.
Give a good account of ourselves. And what I used to love was, it was, you know, we kicked off at 10:30 in the morning, and I'm sure the first season we played in it was 35-minute halves. And the reason for that was because this is the days back in 1990 when pubs on a Sunday opened at 12 and closed at 2 or 3 if you had a social club. So the idea was to get in the pub for 12 o'clock so they could make the most of what was probably only 2 hours drinking time. So we kicked off at half time. We used to request, can we kick off a bit later? Got told a flat, absolutely not. Why are we only playing 35-minute halves with a 5-minute turnaround? So you could run in the showers and be there at 1 minute past 12 to have your first pint. But absolutely brilliant days. Just loved it.
The West Yorkshire Sunday League is a great memory, isn't it? But I don't think it obviously doesn't exist anymore. But I'm sure there'd be lots of people who could share those memories with you. But your first really significant role in professional rugby league was when you were the marketing manager for the new Gateshead Thunder Club in 1999 for that really memorable season. And I always recall being there at the very first match, and the crowd. You know, there was a very significant crowd there at the International Stadium, and we all thought this was really going to go well, and actually it did go well for that year. You finished 6th in the league, didn't you? And you were backed by the Northern Rock Building Society, I seem to recall.
Yeah.
Back then, Shane Richardson was the man in charge with
Kath,
Kath Hetherington, and but the trouble was the club was underfunded, undercapitalized, wasn't it? Didn't have, and in its wisdom in those days, the RFL gave the club less money than all the other clubs, and there was only, I suppose, going to be one outcome.
It was. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Martyn. What started off as something, really exciting. It actually grew over the year, and the crowds got bigger, and it was built off the back. We'd had a good development program for a number of years. Built on a lot of volunteers, a lot of great partners up there. And you're right, I think if we'd have won one more game, we'd have been in the top 5 in our first season, which would have been incredible. But we received half the funding of every other club, central funding. So it was always going to be an uphill task. As always happens when you start with a professional sports club, I'm not even going to say rugby league. Perhaps some of the revenue projections aren't quite where you think they are. And then the costs just seem to climb and climb. And that, coupled with half the central funding, just meant that by the end of the year, the money had run out. And it was a real shame. And then really the opportunity came, didn't it? They were moving from 14 clubs to 12. And there was the offer for clubs that would receive effectively double funding for 2 years. They'd receive 2 lots of funding if they merged. And Gateshead and Hull FC did that, as did Huddersfield and Sheffield. So pretty controversial at the time. It's difficult, isn't it? If you're an owner of that club and you're losing money hand over fist, and you're given that option to rescue your club or perhaps get some of your money back. If I was in their position, would I do the
same thing?
Possibly, yeah. Possibly.
But the great thing was that in the case of both Gateshead and Sheffield, there were people behind those clubs that didn't want to see them die. And that ultimately led to, what we now have, Newcastle Thunder, a very strong championship side and so on. And we'll come on to that a bit later. But you actually left, when Gateshead Thunder did merge with Hull, you stayed in the Northeast and you became the head of marketing at the Newcastle Falcons, where you spent a couple of years, didn't you, I think? And, that was probably the first time you dipped your toe into rugby union, I suspect.
It was, yeah, Martyn. I was, I could really, at that point, like a lot of rugby league people, could really have took a left rugby union. I wasn't a big fan of it, and it just didn't really appear on my radar. I had the chance to go to Hull with Shane and the team, but at the time, my wife had a really good job in the Northeast, so we were never going to move. And then the Falcons offered me the opportunity, and I remember the first game I went to. 18 months earlier, they'd been crowned champions on their first season in the Premiership, and it was under Sir John Hall. He had effectively bought half the British Lions and bought the title, but it was quite an old
Johnny
team.
Wilkinson obviously was
Johnny Wilkinson was coming through, but Rob Andrew and Doddy Weir and a lot of these guys, and John Bentley, Alan Tate, some good rugby league guys in there as well. It was a team put together, and there wasn't a lot underpinning it. So fast forward then 18 months, and I remember the first game after I agreed to go. I went to the ground. I remember the crowd. It was a Friday night European Challenge Cup game against a team from France. And the crowd was 1,234. And I remember it because it was 1, 2, 3, 4. And that included season ticket holders. And two things struck me. Number one, there were just no kids around the place. It was just full of what you would call a traditional rugby union, very white, middle class support base. And the second bit was, when I looked at the revenue from the match alone, the ticket sales, ignore the season tickets that had already been spent. The ticket money for that night paid for Inga Twigamala for the first 19 minutes. That's it. It didn't pay for any other player, didn't pay for any of the match cost, the venue hire, any of the running costs that week. So it's at that point when you realise, and it's a thing that stuck with me through everything, is that, as we become more and more digital in this world, we're more sort of sport has never been. Ultimately, though, you've still got to sell tickets, and that's stuck with me for the last 30 years, because people in the ground create the atmosphere and actually make it a more compelling offer for the TV viewer watching at home.
Absolutely. So you had a couple of years as head of marketing. You then went to be the community marketing manager for Premier Rugby. By the way, I'm reading most of this from your LinkedIn profile, which is a very, very good and well put together profile, Mick. I really admire the way you've set it all out. You make it very easy for people like me talking to you. But so you were with Premier Rugby for a couple of years. Then you went back as the commercial director to Newcastle Falcons from February 2004 to August 2008. And then you made a big jump back into rugby league as the chief executive of Wigan. Then as now, as they and many people like to sort of say, the biggest club in the game. That must have been a really interesting time for you.
It was a fantastic time. As you say, I'd enjoyed a couple of years down at Premiership Rugby. I've always based a lot of what I've done on community principles and growing the game and selling tickets that way. 4 great years at Newcastle again, off the back of the World Cup, and we had Johnny Wilkinson, so it was just a fantastic time to be at the club, and some really incredible moments. But when Wigan come knocking, it's pretty hard to ignore that they are the biggest name in rugby league. They haven't been the biggest club at certain points over the last few decades in terms of success, but they're just huge. And I worked for Ian Lenigan, had just bought the club there. Joe Lydon was involved, and they just showed the vision of how they were going to put Wigan back together. And I was excited to be part of that. And I did a couple of years at Wigan, and probably one of the decisions I look back on. I left after 2 years, and I left just as the club were about to win the first grand final for 12 years. It'd been a pretty barren time for the club.
You'd appointed Michael Maguire at that time, hadn't you? Had you been instrumental in that?
Look, most of that was Ian's decision, but I fielded the initial call and did a bit of the initial checks and presented him to Ian to then sort of negotiate with and get over the line. I think credit's also got to go to Brian Noble, who was there before. Brian put together, I think, when you look at the team that won the grand final in 2010, wasn't massively different to the one that was there in 2009. I just think it matured another year. Brian had given a lot of the young players an opportunity. He's the guy that gave Sam Tompkins his chance and Joel Tompkins, etc., etc. So a lot of it, I think, is Brian's work. But look, Michael was a different level. Maggie was utterly fantastic. His attention to detail was just brilliant, and he just got a bit more out of that same group of players. And
he was incredibly single-minded, wasn't he? Was Michael? He, the times when I met him, he was so focused. You got the feeling that you didn't want to ask him a daft question really, because you felt a bit silly if you did, and. It was that sort of a guy, slightly in awe of him in a sense, at least I was, because I knew that he knew about 10,000 times more about rugby league than I did. He
was incredible. His attention to detail, his understanding of the game were a different level. And sort of, I'm not even going to say 9 to 5 because he was in the office at sort of 6 in the morning. But during that working day, he was just focused on success and everything that would contribute towards that, and he just built an unbelievably close sort of relationship between the team and the staff and all the sort of ancillary support services. I'm not even going to say it's a siege mentality, but it was just a bond that I hadn't seen before. And absolutely single-minded, and as I say, took what was essentially the same group of players and just probably added that last 5 to 10% that made the club a champion team in 2010.
And after that, you went back into rugby union with Sale Sharks, didn't you? And I think, was that when they'd moved to the AJ Bell Stadium? Or were they still?
It wasn't. It was about 18 months before. So I did the move to the AJ Bell Stadium, which was interesting because you were negotiating with Peel Holdings, who owned the Trafford Centre, and that taught me a lot about negotiation. Look, I really enjoyed my time at Sale. Brian Kennedy is an incredible guy. He would talk to you, and he had a way that by the end of the meeting on a one-to-one with him, if he asked you to run through a brick wall for him, you'd do it. He just had a way of just enthusing you and just making you feel sort of 10 times bigger than you actually were. Looking back on it, that's perhaps the one sort of moment in my career where I probably wish I'd have stayed at Wigan, and that's no disrespect to what happened at Sale, because I had a lot of really good times at Sale. But you could see what was building at Wigan. I'll be honest, I left for an unbelievable package at Sale. It was something that I couldn't ignore and to look after my family. But if I had my time again, I would have stayed at Wigan, because Ian and the directors and Michael there were, and then Sean Wayne afterwards, were building something really special. And then it would have been great to have sort of gone to Old Trafford with the team after I've been there for sort of 3 quarters of the year, and then the year after they went to Wembley for the first time, and then became regular visitors to both over the next sort of 6 or 7 years. But look, perhaps my only little regret, but don't get me wrong, there were lots of great times at Sale as well in the couple of years I was there.
Yeah. And you, you stayed there for just over 2 years, and then you got involved with England rugby, didn't you? And in particular with the World Cup in 2015. What was your role there?
So I came in as a general manager for host cities. So this is around the time I started my consultancy, and I went in as a sort of consultant to the World Cup. So it was just fantastic. another scale of major events that I hadn't really been involved with before. I'd done big events, I'd done big games, but this was just another level. And yeah, it was a really. I was there from the very early stages back in 2012, and we went round and selected venues, and you know, we had lots of interest from host cities and venues. What was, you know, back in 2009 when they won the bid, they listed a load of stadia. But what became obvious is that some of them couldn't do it or didn't want to do it. So we almost had to reopen the process there to select host cities and venues. And that's become something over the last 10 years, Martyn, I've been really interested in this. So, you know, why do we place certain sporting events in certain host cities? Why do host cities bid for them? What's the process on both sides, really, the sort of bidding process that makes a successful major event or tournament? And that's something that I've, you know, taken with me through sort of the last 10 years, and I'm doing today at the Rugby League World Cup.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. But you actually went back to Newcastle Falcons as a managing director, didn't you? And then in 2016, July 2016, you became the chairman of Newcastle Thunder. Were you instrumental in the Falcons taking over the Newcastle Thunder? Did you play a role in that, or
yeah, I did. You know,
before you got there?
One of several people. So yeah, I'd gone back to Newcastle as managing director, which was great. Third time back at a club that's meant a lot to me. Really impressed with the vision of the owner, Seymour Curdy, who's still there today. And what was great was Gateshead at the time was being run by and actually owned by a guy that he's actually a good friend of mine. But the story is, I went to, in my early days as a development officer, in that first summer, I went into a school in Wallsend and I coached a really quite cocky 15-year-old kid who always had an answer for everything, who was a very good rugby league player as well. And that guy was Keith Christie. Now, Keith, years later, actually became a director and then the owner of Gateshead Thunder. And it was, you know, through discussions with Keith, who's actually a very good personal friend of mine. You know, Keith had already actually started work with Seymour at helping the Falcons a bit by the time I got back to the club. And it was just chatting. Then there was always the plan to bring Gateshead Thunder over to the stadium. Seymour bought the club because his vision is he wants two top flight teams playing out at Kingston Park. You know, rugby league in the summer, or a Super League side in the summer, and then a Premiership Rugby Union side in the winter. And that's what the club is moving towards, and Seymour is. And Keith's still involved to this day as a director. And I think it's just one great lesson there, Martyn, is when we get kids playing the sport, everybody thinks brilliant, they're going to play, you know, they're going to become, you know, players for the sport, which is fantastic. Yeah. But actually, there's other legacies on that as well. A lot become fans of the sport, ticket buyers. Actually, there's one or two becomes administrators. So yes. Keith Christie probably started off way before my time as a development officer as a sort of a gangly sort of 10, 11-year-old kid in Wallsend playing rugby league, and he's gone all the way through. He's owned a club, he's been a chief exec, and actually, the more we can get, you know, rugby league played in parts of the country away from the traditional heartlands, the more we're going to get not just new players, but potential new sponsors. Sure. And new administrators.
Absolutely, and I mean, the one thing that, I mean, you announced your departure from both the Falcons and Newcastle Thunder 2 or 3 weeks ago, didn't you? And I just wonder, obviously, I was really glad to see you at Newcastle because I obviously know that you've got a great passion for rugby league, and as long as you were there, I tend to think that Thunder were in safe hands, of course. Can you reassure me that they still are now that you're no longer there?
Very, very much so, Martyn. Look, it was a huge team effort. It was, and you've got not just one but two great owners. So Seymour Curdy is the majority owner. You've got another guy called Dave Thompson, who owns 20% of Newcastle Rugby Limited, that own Thunder. Dave's been around professional sport for 20 years, and has been an incredibly successful businessman over those years as well, and he's got a great commercial mind. So not just that, but you've just got great people like Dennis Betts, Eamon Carroll, Jordan Robinson as the general manager there now. You've got good directors, Keith's still there, Jan Neighbour. So you're part of a bigger structure at Thunder as well. So yes, there might only be sort of, a limited number of full-time off-field staff that do Thunder only, but they've got a finance department that they tap into. They've got HR, they've got marketing, they've got commercial, they've got a non-match day sales team, they've got bars functions. So It's part of a bigger organisation. It's a great model for the club, and it has allowed what is, it's seen some good growth in some good areas. You've got a fantastic academy sort of being run by Michael Heap now, and now more staff underneath that supporting it. So look, I was one small cog in a very big machine, and part of the reason for going, Martyn, was, we'll come on to Rugby League World Cup. It's a huge year for the tournament, and I was putting more and more time towards that through my consultancy. But the biggest thing was, I was finding I had about a day a week left to work at Thunder and Falcons, and it's just not enough. And if I was being absolutely honest, I wasn't being fair to the club. They weren't getting the best out of me, purely because I was finding myself with less and less time. And rather than just try and keep lots of plates spinning and having a few crash to the ground, I just thought the timing was right. They're in good hands. They've got a great vision for the future. Would I go back one day? Yeah, of course I would. For the right opportunity, if it was right for me and right for them down the line. Yeah. I'm certainly not saying I will do, but it's not like I've left and I'm huffing and saying I'm never going to go back. I left on the very best of terms, and I'll be there this weekend. I'm not sure when this podcast, but this Sunday when the Thunder play weekend, I'll be there with a group of 7 or 8 mates, and buying my tickets and supporting the team.
Do you actually still live up in Newcastle, Mick?
Yeah, I do. So
where do you come from originally, by the way? I'm not even sure about that.
So I'm from the centre of the universe. It's a little place that you'll know well called Leigh. So
Lee, I do. You're a Leigh lad. Oh gosh, right.
I am from Leigh. I'm from.
Well, Derek Beaumont would be very pleased to hear you say that. I'm fairly sure.
Well, look. So again, a little known fact, but at the same primary school, I was in the same class as Derek Beaumont.
Really?
Oh,
were you big mates with him though?
We'd knock about together at sort of playtime. I always remember that Derek was fearless, so we'd play on a concrete, playground like everybody else, and we'd play football. And he would always be in goal. I remember this, and I remember him diving on the concrete multiple times and pulling off this series of amazing saves. But then going in at the end of break time, absolutely covered in cuts and bruises, but just turning around and going, "Yeah, I'm fine. Honestly, I'm fine." And you just thought, this bloke is mentally tough. He really is, and I think he's proven that. And look, so we were in the same class together, and I know everybody else I look 15, 20 years younger, but we are the same age.
Marvellous. Yeah. And final point on Newcastle Thunder. I remember in a previous discussion I once had with you, you said that you were confident, and Seymour Curdy was confident, that Newcastle could win the Super League title by 2030. I'm sure I remember you saying that.
Yeah.
And obviously, you need to get promotion first to be able to do that. But do you think that timetable is still potentially achievable?
Definitely. It's the club's mission. I think you could say, we'll put it back a year because of COVID, but no. It is eminently achievable by 2030. Look, most of the Super League clubs haven't won the Super League, but I think so it is ambitious, but you've got a great academy that is really starting to produce some fantastic players. And you look at the team at the weekend, they played a friendly up in Barrow, and by the end of the game, more than 50% of the team were academy players. Just what's interesting now, start to look at, particularly Workington, particularly Whitehaven, other teams in the division. Coventry have had it as well. You're now getting clubs with 3, 4, even 5 players that are ex-Thunder Academy graduates or even ex-Thunder players. So the club is not just producing for Newcastle Thunder now, it's producing for quite a few other clubs across the Championship and League One. And that's just going to grow and grow, because as more and more kids in the North East choose rugby league as their first sport, and actually more and more talented kids choose it, you're going to see more players come through.
Are you pleased, by the way, to see the Championship coming back on TV this year with Premier Sports broadcasting Monday night games? Is that a good thing, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. And look, clubs will rightly raise concerns over fans and in particular the impact it has on travelling fans. But let's see it as an opportunity. Let's it's got its own Monday night slot now, which will take a bit of time to establish itself. But what a great year for rugby league. I think I read it in your paper, man, because I'm actually into a little stat here. I'm into my 29th, I think, consecutive year now of getting League Express through my doorstep, through my letterbox every Monday morning. So, and I'm sure I read the stat in your paper that said, look at the number of live games of rugby league you've got this year across all the. As fans, we've never had it so good.
We're spoilt, aren't we, this year? There's no doubt about it. And that brings us on to the World Cup, because the biggest thing about this year is obviously the World Cup itself, and it's something you're intimately involved in. Obviously, at this, August the 4th, I think it was August the 4th, was the day that the Australians and New Zealanders said they weren't coming in 2021. And I've got to say that on that particular day, I felt angry and really livid, if I'm honest. I could have marched over there and shot them all, really, if I could have jumped on a plane to do it. But with hindsight, though, it's funny how time is the great healer, isn't it? Because with hindsight, I actually think that it might even be better. I mean, we look as though we're coming, hopefully, to the end of the restrictions associated with the pandemic. So hopefully, you never know with new variants. We could all be back to square one potentially, but hopefully we won't be. I think, in 2022, the World Cup could even be better than it would have been in 2021. How do you feel about it?
Absolutely agree with that. Could we have put a tournament on last year? Yes, we could, but you wouldn't have had a big portion of the world's best athletes wouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
And that's what people want to see. They want to see the best players in the world. So certainly the Australia, New Zealand teams wouldn't have been there. We don't know what knock-on effect that would have had as well. Although they never said it, you did worry about some of the other teams being able to fulfill it. And the second bit is, I think we look at how we would have organised it. We'd have got away with it. It would have been good, but I'm not sure it would have been as fantastic as it could have been. We've got a team internally, Martyn, that up till a point quite late last year, some people hadn't physically met each other. They'd been trying to organise a tournament via Zoom for the previous 18 months. And look, it's become a way of life now, Zooms and Teams meeting as we're on now. But you can't organise a major tournament that way.
No.
We've been back in the office now. We're about to come back in the office sort of pretty much full time. We've got that one thing that tournaments never have. We've been given an extra year. Yeah. All right. We're 3 months further on now. We're 9 months away. But I believe we're now into some of the planning now that we were still struggling to put into place in sort of June and July last year.
I mean, the great thing is that for the most part, I think in about 95% of cases, the venues that were, going to hold the tournament in 21 are still doing in 22 with one or two exceptions. But it's difficult to look at the tournament in 22 and say it's been weakened in any way by what's happened.
It's potentially been strengthened, Martyn, because you mentioned the 4th of August. 107 days later, the team led by John Dutton has got a tournament redone. 170 separate agreements had to be renegotiated. A lot of those with host cities and venues and teams. The critical bit is when we went back on sale, we've got every single team has now signed a participation agreement, and that wasn't the case in 21. We've got every single venue now committed. Yes, we had to make a couple of changes, but they weren't decisions we made. They were situations that were presented to them. But we've kept that England game that was at Anfield, that England quarterfinal in the Northwest. So we've minimised the inconvenience to the ticket buyers who, funnily enough, were predominantly from the Northwest. We've had to swap Hull and Leeds, but at least we've maintained the number of fixtures at those. And
the interesting thing about that Northwest game is that it always looked odd not having any games at the DW Stadium, didn't it? Really, and I don't know why that was, but it's good to have a game there. I think you want a World Cup game in Wigan, surely. Yeah,
look, decisions were made sort of 2, 3, even 4 years earlier based on a set of criteria. I wasn't party to those, but there were probably there were different circumstances around a lot of the bids then, and certain decisions were made. I think now we've just got we've got a really strong lineup. we've maintained, pretty much well over 90% of the exact same fixtures and the same run on the same days with the same kickoff times. We're the BBC have recommitted, which is incredible news. I think
certainly
people are going to be blown away by, they're going to cover every single game live across one of the platforms. A huge proportion of those games are going to be on BBC One and BBC Two. The sport will never have seen coverage like it's going to receive later this year for a major tournament.
No, I must say I was watching the BBC's coverage on the BBC website of the Challenge Cup at the weekend with Oral St James playing the Army. And even that was just a great thing to watch. What a tremendous game and what a great crowd it was at Oral St James. It just, as a little sort of taster for what might come via the BBC later. And of course, they will cover every round of the Challenge Cup. That relationship with the BBC is worth its weight in gold for Rugby League, I would have said.
It is, we've got to make the most of that. So, how do we access not just the BBC sport channels, but the wider sort of, the other channels that they've got, and so we can reach other sections of the community, not just in the build-up to the tournament, but during the tournament. But what a powerful message that will be on the 15th of October. If our plans come to fruition and there are 50,000 people in St James's Park and 20,000 at Headingley later that night, if we're live on BBC at 2:30 in the afternoon and England are taking on Samoa in Newcastle and it's a sellout, what a great statement for our sport. And I just think it will make so many people sit up and take notice, and it will have such you'll see a tidal wave of enthusiasm, of interest that will just wash throughout the rest of the tournament. And
do you think we will reach a sellout for the England-Samoa game, Mick, at St James's
Yes,
Park?
I do. I'm very confident. You look at the sales where we're currently at and the plans that we've got in place. And look, I've been part of a team over the last 6 or 7 years that's had a very much a big game focus up at Newcastle. So when you look back, we've had 5 Magic Weekends there now. We hosted the European Rugby Union club finals there. There were 3 games in the Rugby Union World Cup, and England have taken internationals, and the Falcons took 2 games. So look, I mentioned just a number earlier for the Falcons of 1,234. Rugby in the North East, it's always been a challenger sport, both codes. It's always been difficult. The Falcons games we took normal league games. We put 30,000 people in. So
you turn them into events, in other words.
Turn them into events, and that's exactly what we'll do with the Rugby League World Cup, not just at St James's Park, but the 3 games at Kingston Park and then down at Middlesbrough, at every venue. But yeah, I'm confident because you've got a North East sporting public now that over the last 6, 7 years has had 10 plus huge rugby events of both codes. So they are used to going to that stadium. They like going to that stadium. And whenever big rugby league or rugby union events come, they turn up in big numbers.
Absolutely. Just looking at the, obviously you'll have a detailed knowledge of all the ticket sales for every World Cup game, however big or small. Would you say that at the moment you're ahead of projections, or, because obviously the COVID problem will have deterred a lot of people from buying tickets, one would imagine, wouldn't you? And, that's why it's so important that we genuinely believe we're getting to the end of this pandemic and we can start living life normally again. Are you ahead of projections, or has it meant that you've got to catch up a bit in some areas? And
no, I think we're right on track. We've got some really strong sales, Martyn. We did have to do a refund period last year, sort of in late in 2021. Some people took advantage of that, but
what proportion of people wanted their money back, Mick? If you can tell me that.
We don't go into numbers. It was, look, the vast majority kept their money and the tickets in.
It was a very small number who wanted it back.
It was a small, it was the minority of ticket sales that we've done. But of that number that did, close to half of those have indicated via a survey that they will be rebuying and coming to the tournament. It's just, look, when he got to the end of last year, there is this uncertainty now. And we were in the lead up to Christmas, so I don't blame people for wanting the money in the pocket. Some people genuinely couldn't make it then. Just because you could make that opening game in St Helens in 2021, and we've put it on pretty much the same point in the schedule, it doesn't mean you're around in 2022. So there were genuine reasons why some people couldn't make it. But again, what we've got is another 12 months to not just resell to those people, but to go out to lots of new people and bring them in. But look, we're going to have some great attendances at this World Cup. Yeah. It's going to beat some records.
Do you think the Emirates Stadium will? I mean, that's a semi-final, isn't it? And do you think that will generate hopefully a sellout crowd?
Yeah, again, very much the target is a sellout crowd for that, and we've got some great numbers for that. That's our second behind the final. That's our second biggest selling game there. Just slightly ahead of the opener at St James's Park.
And let's just imagine. I mean, the one guy who I don't feel envious of in relation to the World Cup, and this may seem a strange thing to say, but I'd hate to be Sean Wayne, because that first game at St James's Park is a hell of a potential banana skin for him, isn't it? The Samoans, you look at the Samoans in the NRL, and my God, there are some good players. And a lot of people are saying, "Oh, Samoa," people who don't know rugby league very well might say, "Well, that's a certain win for England," but in fact, it's anything but. And as somebody was saying to me, an Australian friend of mine was saying, he thinks Samoa's the favourites to win that game. And with every World Cup, it just helps enormously for subsequent ticket sales if the host country can win the first game, doesn't it? So I imagine that your fingers. I mean, you. Officially, I suppose, as a tournament official, you've got to be neutral. But my goodness, I should think you'll have your fingers behind your back with your fingers crossed.
Yeah, look, we want a good game. Would it be beneficial to further ticket sales and further interest if England win? Of course it would. But you're right, the potential Samoan team that could turn out is incredible. Whether that team gets to the start line, because with some of their players, they qualify for more than one nation, and it will come down to which nation they want to play for. So, I think there's some great storytelling around that in the build up to the tournament, and it will pique some great interest. But what would be my ideal, Martyn? I've got to, taking my neutral hat off for just 5 seconds. I would love an England win, but I'd love an England win by, say, 22 points to 18, and a fantastic match on BBC One.
Well, victory by a late field goal would do me, I've got to say. Yeah. But and just let's assume that it is going to be a massively successful tournament, which I'm sure it will be. And perhaps it ends hopefully with England beating Australia at Old Trafford in the final. We can all hope, can't we? The key thing really then is the legacy, what we do afterwards, because it's great that we're going to, there's no doubt about it, is there, that by the end of this year, the English public is going to know a lot more about rugby league than it probably does now as a whole. There'll be some people at the moment who don't know anything about our sport, who hopefully by the end of the year will be very enthusiastic about it. So how do we build on that? How do we actually take advantage of that upsurge in popularity, assuming it's going to happen, to solidify the future of the sport itself? What would you be planning for the future?
Look, I think it's important to note that as tournament organisers, we're not going to be around to see that legacy through. But those discussions have already been ongoing for some time with other partners, so with Super League and with the RFL, because I think as tournament organisers, we can enable the opportunity for legacy to take place. And it's not just legacy. There's a lot of stuff we've done in the lead up to the tournament as well. So, 15, I think the press release came out today, £15 million, and it's hopeful that it be £20 million or above of funding has gone into rugby league. So that's tangible bricks and mortar. You look at Salford City Roosters having a new clubhouse, and it's happened elsewhere as well. New pitches going down. Lots of clubs applying for grants and equipment. That is enabling a legacy to continue afterwards with new participants. It's interesting when we talk about participants. Everybody thinks about people playing the sport, and we hope there will be an upturn in people playing the sport, not just sort of junior and senior, but in particular women's rugby league. We've got let's not forget we have three competitions in one tournament. We've got the men's,
Absolutely.
the women's, and the wheelchair. And we'd love to see a huge upturn in people wanting to get involved in wheelchair rugby league. So, but participants, not just about players. Participants could become people that come to games. So, you buy a ticket at Middlesbrough and you love it so much that actually you start going to rugby league games in York or Hull or Leeds on a regular basis. A participant can be a TV viewer, Martyn, and they have tremendous value, because the more people watch the sport at home on TV, the greater the money that will come in from broadcasters down the line. But you want that sort of legacy as well from sponsors. So the Rugby League World Cup has introduced a lot of new sponsors that haven't previously been involved in the game in a big way. So we've got Kazoo as the principal partner. You've got Selco. I know Selco have sort of been down at London with the Broncos before, and I know with Salford. But you've got some fantastic sponsors there, and Deloitte as well. We've signed an NFT deal as well with New Arca, which is, I know some clubs are moving into that space as well with these digital tokens. And
a lot of people are trying to get their heads around that as we speak, aren't they?
Me included, Martyn. Me included. So, look, the legacy is hopefully that we do a good job, but we work in conjunction with the RFL and Super League and the clubs, so that these people that have come into the sport for the first time, whether they're a sponsor, whether they're a media outlet, whether they're a ticket buyer, they want to continue that association with rugby league. And those plans are well underway. The biggest factor in it, and I think you've touched on it, is England's success. Hopefully, not just in one, but in all three tournaments. England's success on the BBC would be the biggest boost to people wanting to get involved in our sport. But that's the one thing that is out of everybody's control, other than Sean Wayne and the players.
Which is why I don't envy him. Yeah, absolutely. Were you pleased to see the 2025 tournament going to France? Is that a big development from your point of view?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. It's for me, France are, they've struggled. They've had so much adversity over the last, several decades, haven't they? It's difficult to forget that they were probably the rugby league powerhouse in the 1950s, and they've got every chance of success. They'll have a Rugby Union World Cup in 2023. They'll have the Olympics in 2024. They will have galvanised that nation into big global events. And if some of that success and feel-good factor can then come into rugby league, then fantastic. Really ambitious plans. I love the fact that it's 4 tournaments. It's probably double the number of games that we've got. It's double the number of teams. So you can't say they lack
ambitious, doesn't it? Yeah.
They've got it all to do, because they've got 3 years to put it together, whereas the plans for this tournament that we've had probably started 6 years ago, and I know that John Dutton and Stephen Brown are certainly into the 7th year. So they've got it all to do, but there's no reason why it can't be successful. And I think it's our job as well. Again, there's a bit of a legacy piece there, that the learnings that we have and what we do well from here, and actually perhaps what we might not do so well, that we hand that information and that knowledge over to the French, so that they can take that and make what they do that bit bigger and that bit better for the sport.
And just going back to where we started, as we come to an end, the Northeast, we're going to have a World Cup game in Middlesbrough, as you've said already. Do you think there's the potential for at least one other professional club in the Northeast, in that part of the world, if somebody wanted to grasp the nettle and put it together?
Definitely. The Northeast is a big geographical area, so from Middlesbrough and even Darlington up to Newcastle is a good sort of 40 minutes. Take 40 minutes along the M62, and you'll not get 2 clubs. You'd probably get 22 clubs, wouldn't you? Yeah. So definitely. But look, these things, there's lots of component parts to making a successful club. You've got to have a good venue. You've got to have good backing. You've got to have a community program. Over time, you've got to be able to source your own players. That doesn't happen in day one. But
no,
the one advantage you would have, if there's ever a professional club in that sort of Tees Valley area, is it's a bit close to the heartland. So potentially, would more travelling supporters go to games? Does it make it easier to get players in the early years to make sure they have a competitive team?
Yeah, absolutely. Mick, if you just hang on a bit, but after we've stopped recording this session, but I think that's the point probably at which we will draw it to a close officially. So thank you once again for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you, and I hope we'll be able to do this again at some time when perhaps we're a bit nearer to the World Cup, because there are probably another 1,000 questions I could ask you, actually, if I'm really honest about it. And you know, it's been great to see you, and thanks very much. We'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks, Martyn.